So have you been following this case in New Mexico? The state wants a court to declare social media a public nuisance. Well, maybe they are on to something. New polling data from Gallup shows young people especially are less happy than they were a decade ago, with heavy social media use linked to lower life satisfaction and higher levels of stress and sadness. More proof that we are more digitally connected than ever and yet more alone than ever. Mimi Nicklin is the author of multiple best-selling books on empathy and human connection. Her newest is The Connection Prescription, out this month. And Mimi, basically what you are saying is something we have heard before. We are replacing human connection with the illusion of it.
Yes, Chris, exactly that. I think often today we confuse visibility with actually being understood. And of course, social media heightens that in many ways because you feel people are liking your posts and looking at your photos, which, you could confuse for being connected with others. But of course, being visible and actually being understood are very different realities.
Yeah. You are also quick to point out, though, that you see this as a connection crisis, not necessarily a tech issue, or not just a tech issue.
Absolutely, Chris. I don't think we can blame the platforms. That's not to say that the way we use those platforms isn't up for debate, because I think, of course, we could always use those platforms better. But the reality is that technology and social media, in many ways, creates connection. It can do a lot of good for us and our relationships. But of course, that is when we use those platforms with the understanding that we do need to be listening, we need to be creating connection, being able to empathize, understand other people. And what's interesting, Chris, is in that report from Gallup that you mentioned at the beginning, what the report also shows is that for young people, zero social media usage is also detrimental. So what the report is showing is that when you use moderate social media, people are happier than if they use too much or none at all.
So, and that's what I thought was really interesting, again, tying it into this case in New Mexico where they want to declare social media a public nuisance. It sounds to me as if they are, and many people have done this, not to, dump on the state of New Mexico. Many people have done this, kind of scapegoating social media for a larger problem. And as long as we are scapegoating, we're not really going to be able to fix it.
I think, Chris, one of the bigger challenges here is that we need to train and teach and educate on how to use these platforms, on the role of human connection, on why it is that we need each other. We are a pro-social species. That means that as humans, we do better when we are in connection to each other. But unfortunately, that information is not widely understood. And often in places like the United States, for example, where young people are spending, especially young women, are spending up to 5 hours a day on social media, they're not aware of the detrimental impact to their health and their social relationships. So from my point of view, Chris, I don't believe that the answer is to sort of ban the platforms or blame the platforms, but to retrain, to teach the people using them.
So kind of let's delineate this here, because if it is not social media per se, what is it that we have replaced real connection with? If it's not social media in and of itself, what is it?
The reality is, Chris, that over the last 40 years, we have lost nearly 50% of our empathy, this skill set that enables us to understand other people. And for clarity, for all of your listeners today, to empathize doesn't mean to be nice. It doesn't mean to be kind or to be compassionate or to sympathize. To empathize, to use empathy, is this skill set of taking the perspective of another, not to judge, not to agree, not to like, but simply to understand where that person is coming from. So that's why I believe that the problem here is not necessarily the platform, whether that's social media or the telephone, right? Or it doesn't matter what the platform is.
Yeah.
It is our ability as people to understand those who have a different perspective from our own. And that is a skill set. Empathy, it sits in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. It is a skill set. So when we really say, what are we missing? Well, we're missing the practice, actually, because like any skill set, the more you practice it, the better you become at it.
Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, how do we rebuild this human connection that we are missing?
I think the first step is for people like you, Chris, to have conversations like this on your show. So thank you, because a huge part of this is around awareness, is making sure that people understand what these skill sets are, and when we don't have them, what that means to our health, to our community health, to our children's health. So the impact of that. The first step has to be awareness. And there are phenomenal individuals, corporations and governments around the world who are aiming to fix that. Once we have established a higher level of awareness, it is to give people the opportunity to practice these skills. So fundamentally, if I were to give your listeners, one tip for today's show, it would be to really consider how you listen first, how you listen more than you speak, how you go into conversations with the intention to understand before replying. And I think if we can really drive both the awareness and the practice of those skill sets, people will see almost instantly the impact that has on their relationships, their professional relationships and their personal ones. So it's quite a quick change if we just get that ball rolling.
My mom always used to say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should be listening twice as much as you are speaking. I don't know that she was necessarily an expert in the field, but, that proves the wisdom of that old saying. And just to kind of reemphasize, what is the cost of not doing this? What is the cost of this constant communication but not really listening?
In the end, as humans, when we are not seen or heard, not only does that impact our health mentally and emotionally, but also physically, Chris. So according to the Surgeon General in the USA last year, to be chronically lonely, so to be chronically disconnected from those around you, is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So the cost of loneliness is quite literally impacting your health. You see chronic disease increase, you see immunity decrease, and today we have nearly 400 million people with anxiety or depression. Now, not all of these will always be directly linked back to loneliness, of course, but the data is extremely clear. As humans, we are not meant to be alone. And when you are alone or disconnected long term, you will suffer emotionally, mentally, and physically as well.
And again, we're talking about truly being alone, not the illusion. I mean, despite the illusion of being connected, it is, the actual real human connections that we need. So again, not to get caught up in all of the illusions of that quite often technology brings about. Mimi Nicklin, again, is author of her new book, is The Connection Prescription, one of several on the topic. Where do folks learn more about the book, Mimi?
Well, if they Google my name, Chris, they can find me. That's Mimi Nicklin, or look up empathyeverywhere.co, and they can find out where those books are near to them.
Mimi Nicklin, thanks very much for taking the time. A lot there for folks to think about this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.